Something happened last night that the most powerful air force in the Middle East does not want to explain. Israeli F-35s, the most advanced fighter jets on the planet, aircraft that cost American taxpayers over $400 billion to develop, went operationally blind over the Eastern Mediterranean. Not from enemy missiles, not from mechanical failure, from a signal. A deliberately crafted, precisely targeted electronic signal that Iran pushed silently through the sky and straight into the navigation backbone of the world's most expensive warplane. If that doesn't stop you in your tracks, you haven't understood what just shifted. Stay with me, because this goes much deeper than one night's operation. I spent decades inside the military. I have sat in the rooms where these decisions are made, where threat assessments are written, and where the gap between what generals say publicly and what they know privately grows into something dangerous. I am telling you now, with that experience behind every word, what happened last night is not a glitch. It is not a software hiccup that Lockheed Martin will quietly fix next quarter. It is a strategic signal, and Iran sent it deliberately, calmly, and without firing a single weapon. If this analysis is the kind of honest breakdown you've been looking for, the kind the mainstream networks either can't or won't deliver, then hit subscribe right now and make sure you have notifications turned on. We update this analysis every day. You will want to be here tomorrow. Let's be precise about what GPS actually means inside a fifth-generation fighter, because most people dramatically underestimate how deep that dependency runs. The F-35 is not a plane with a GPS unit bolted to the dashboard. The entire sensor fusion system, the architecture that pulls together radar data, infrared input, electronic warfare feeds, and data link communication from every aircraft in the formation and fuses them into a single, coherent tactical picture for the pilot, uses GPS as its synchronization backbone. Timing, positioning, the heartbeat of the system. When that signal is degraded, the fusion process does not simply become less accurate. Under certain conditions, it begins producing conflicts between data streams that the aircraft cannot resolve. The pilot is then presented with a picture that may be partially wrong. And in combat, partial wrongness is sometimes more dangerous than total failure, because at least with total failure, you know the system is down. With partial wrongness, you might trust a picture that is lying to you. What Iranian electronic warfare assets deployed last night was not simple jamming. Anybody can jam. What the operational evidence indicates is a layered combination of jamming and GPS spoofing, meaning Iran did not just block the signal, they replaced it. They injected false positioning data that the F-35's navigation systems initially accepted as valid before integrity monitoring algorithms could flag the inconsistency. In that brief window, brief but operationally decisive, positional errors propagated into the navigation solution. Missions were aborted. Strike sorties that were tasked with precision targeting of high-value positions returned to base without releasing a single munition, because the confidence threshold required to authorize a precision strike could not be met under the degraded conditions. Think about that. Iran did not shoot down an Israeli jet. They made Israeli jets useless for the night, with electrons and software and years of patient technical investment. And they did it at a fraction of the cost of a single F-35. Now, here is the question that should be keeping senior officials awake in Washington tonight, and almost certainly is. If Iran can do this to Israeli F-35s operating over the Eastern Mediterranean, what does that tell us about every other GPS-dependent platform in the American and Allied arsenal? The precision munitions, the drone networks, the ship-based navigation and targeting systems, the joint terminal attack coordinators on the ground calling in airstrikes. Modern Western military power is built on a foundation of GPS availability so total, so assumed, so deeply embedded in procurement doctrine going back 3 decades that the idea of operating without it has been treated as a contingency rather than a probability. Last night, Iran moved that from contingency to demonstrated reality. And Washington's first instinct, as it almost always is not to fix the problem. It is to manage the narrative around the problem. The public statements you are hearing right now are using words like manageable and within expected parameters. Translate that from institutional language into honest English, and it means we were not fully prepared for the capability Iran just demonstrated, and we need time to figure out what to do about it. Let's talk about how Iran got here, because this capability did not emerge from nowhere, and the Western intelligence community's public posture on Iranian electronic warfare has been consistently, dangerously wrong. The turning point was 2011. Iranian forces brought down a CIA RQ-170 Sentinel stealth drone, largely intact, through a GPS spoofing operation that American officials initially denied was even technically possible. That single event told Iran something crucial. The United States had built its most sensitive, most expensive military technology on a GPS dependency so fundamental that exploiting it could neutralize assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars without firing a single shot. Iran has been building on that lesson for 15 years. They studied what they captured. They accepted Russian technical warfare development. They invested in indigenous engineering programs, and they iterated, quietly, patiently, over a decade and a half, while Western threat assessments continued to publicly describe Iranian electronic warfare as primitive and unsophisticated. Last night was the invoice for that miscalculation. The current Iranian GPS denial and spoofing architecture appears to involve ground-based emitters capable of projecting interference across significant distances, potentially supplemented by elevated or airborne platforms that extend both range and angular coverage. The spoofing component, not just denial but active signal replacement, suggests either direct access to Russian Krasukha-series electronic warfare technology or deep familiarity with the underlying technical principles, which Moscow has been willing to share as the two countries' strategic relationship has deepened since 2022. Russian electronic warfare lessons from Ukraine, both what worked and what failed, have been flowing to Iran. The Shahed drone program has created an operational feedback loop between Moscow and Tehran. These are not separate conflicts. They are interconnected technical partnerships, and the Eastern Mediterranean last night was one of their outputs. Here is what the American response looks like right now, and what its limits are. U.S. Space Command and Cyber Command are conducting an immediate technical characterization of the Iranian electronic warfare signature, trying to determine exactly what systems were deployed, from where, at what power levels, using what spoofing algorithms. That work is being done by capable, serious people, and it is the right first step. EA-18G Growlers, the most capable airborne electronic attack platforms in the American inventory, are being positioned in the Eastern Mediterranean to support Israeli air operations, providing both offensive jamming that can suppress Iranian emitters and defensive coverage that helps Israeli aircraft maintain navigation integrity. All of that is happening, and some of it will help in the near term. But the Growler is not a stealth aircraft. It cannot accompany F-35 formations into the most heavily contested airspace without itself becoming a vulnerability. Its protection has limits, and there is strong reason to believe Iranian operational planning has already accounted for those limits. A countermeasure with a known ceiling is a partial countermeasure, and partial countermeasures in a real conflict cost lives. Beyond the technical dimension, there is a human one, and it is the dimension that Western strategic analysis most consistently gets wrong. The team that designed and executed last night's electronic warfare operation did not improvise it. These are engineers and operators who have spent careers developing, testing, and refining this exact capability. They chose last night as the moment to deploy it at operational scale. That timing was a decision. The message was calculated. Iran is telling Israel and America something very specific. Your technological overmatch has specific exploitable limits, and we know where they are. Meanwhile, the broader Iranian strategic vision, whatever one thinks of it politically or morally, is operating on a time horizon that American domestic politics simply cannot match. Iranian investment in regional influence, in electronic warfare, in precision missile development, has proceeded through sanctions and isolation and military strikes with a consistency that reflects genuine institutional commitment. American strategic commitment to this region, by contrast, depends on election cycles, on public tolerance for open-ended engagement, and on munitions stockpiles that multiple simultaneous commitments are already straining. When you compare those two postures, patient, coherent Iranian long game against increasingly contested American political will, the asymmetry matters as much as the technology gap. The F-35 pilots who flew last night in a degraded navigation environment made professional decisions under real operational pressure. Their individual will and competence is not the question. The question is what the strategic institutions behind them do with what last night revealed. The F-35I is not simply a strike platform. It is the cornerstone of Israeli deterrence, the aircraft that Israeli doctrine depends on for any potential strike against Iranian nuclear facilities. If that aircraft now has to operate in a GPS-denied envelope that Iran can generate over defended territory, the strategic calculus around that option has changed. Not collapsed, changed. But changed in ways that need to be stated honestly rather than managed narratively. The post-Cold War assumption of American technological dominance, the assumption that American-equipped forces could expect to control every domain of a conflict against a capable adversary without meaningful friction, that assumption is not collapsing, but it is narrowing, domain by domain, capability by capability, as 15 years of adversary investment in specific countermeasures matures into operational reality. Russia did this with electronic warfare and air defense. China did this with anti-access systems and anti-satellite weapons. Iran has now done it with GPS denial and spoofing at a level that produced real operational effects in a real combat environment. They were all reading the same lessons from 1991. American military power rests on specific technological pillars. Those pillars can be attacked. Last night was the most recent proof of concept. Taiwan is watching. South Korea is watching. The Gulf states are watching. And every one of them is quietly updating their assessment of what American military guarantees actually mean in a contested electromagnetic environment. This conversation has been deferred too long. The intelligence community needs to stop publishing threat assessments that protect institutional reputations and start publishing ones that protect operational realities. The procurement system needs to stop locking in GPS-dependent architectures based on threat models that are now 15 years stale. And the American people need an honest account of what their country is actually engaged in, what it is actually capable of, and what it will actually cost. Not the comfortable version, not the version that manages optics through a news cycle, the true one. In your assessment, and I want to hear it below, has Iran's electronic warfare capability now reached the point where it is materially changing Israel's strategic options? Not theoretically, operationally. And what does a genuinely correct American response look like? Not the politically comfortable one, the strategically sound one. Leave that in the comments. The people who follow this analysis daily ask better questions than most credentialed journalists covering this conflict. And those questions shape what we dig into next. If this gave you something real, a level of clarity you could not get from standard coverage, share it with one person who needs to understand what is actually happening here. That's how this kind of analysis reaches the people it should reach. If honest, daily military and strategic analysis is what you're looking for, the kind that doesn't sanitize the failures or sell you a comfortable story, you're in the right place. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. We'll be back tomorrow with the next layer of this.